Welcome back, 7th graders. Today we are starting our short story unit, our unit on plot. The target for this unit is I will be able to read a story and correctly identify plot elements and accurately place events of the story on a plot diagram. Our first I can statement is I can recognize and recall vocabulary terms related to plot and accurately place events of a story on a plot diagram. So we're going to be learning some of the terms related to plot, and then we're going to also practice placing events of a story on a plot diagram. So when you're taking notes in your Cornell notes, you'll notice that there are blanks. You need to fill in the words that are blue. So if there's a word that is blue, it's a word that you need to write down on your notes. Okay? Our first term is fiction. Fiction is literature that is imaginative or made up. Of course, the opposite of that is nonfiction, and those are stories that are true, but fiction are made up stories. Even if they're realistic, they are made up. Okay, our second term is plot. Plot is the sequence of main events in a story, or the way that the author plans the story. And the plot diagram is typically shown like this, where you have a beginning, rising action, climax, falling action, exposition. Okay? But most of the time, plot diagrams actually look more like this. They're jagged. Okay? It's a rough ride to the top. There are ups and downs that the characters experience. It is not a smooth line. Okay? But this first part where this hiker's hanging out is the exposition. That is where the setting, characters, and main conflict are introduced. Okay? So think about once upon a time. Once upon a time there was a princess who lived in a castle with a mean stepmother. Okay? So we've had revealed to us the setting, the characters, and the main conflict. In many plots, something happens to introduce or kick off the conflict, some kind of inciting event. But in other plots, the conflict builds more gradually. But oftentimes there is kind of this kaboom incident that happens down here that really gets the conflict moving. Setting is the time, place, and circumstances of a story. And setting is important because it sort of drives the conflict, because there are certain types of conflicts that can happen in certain types of settings. For example, in a setting such as this, you might have a conflict between the natives and the settlers. You might have a wagon wheel that falls off. You might have sickness. You might have a lack of food or something like that. In a setting like this, you might have interplanetary war. You would have your spaceship breaking down. So the conflicts really are driven a lot by the setting. Now, time, place, and circumstances. Circumstances is the situation. So the setting is more than just the time and place of a story. It's also the circumstances of a story. The time might be first period. The place might be math class. But the circumstances might be there's a test that day, or it's a game day. Okay, so the time, place, and circumstances of a story really, they drive the conflict. Okay, you're going to have a different kind of conflict on a test day than you are on a game day. Okay, the next spot on the plot diagram is rising action. That's where the conflict and characters continue to develop and complications arise and or suspense builds. So that's this jagged, rough ride to the top here. Okay? Got to go through all those little bumps related to the conflict as you head up to the top. The conflict is a struggle between opposing characters or forces. Okay? Opposing characters or forces. A force could be a storm, or it could be society. It could be sickness. It could be anything that the characters are struggling against. The protagonist is the main character, or the character that the author wants you to identify with. Whose team are you supposed to be on? Who are you supposed to be cheering for? Okay? The antagonist is the character or force that opposes the protagonist. Who do we as readers feel against? Okay? Who is trying to bring our protagonist down? Who or what is trying to bring our protagonist down? Now keep in mind that the protagonist is not always the good guy. Okay? A lot of times the protagonist is a good guy, but sometimes the protagonist is not the good guy, so that's not a good definition for us to be using. The real definition that we should be using is the protagonist experiences and overcomes the main conflict of the story. So take the Grinch, for example. Certainly not a good guy, but he does experience the conflict and he overcomes the main conflict, okay? He overcomes that bitterness within himself. And so we are cheering for him even though he's not a good guy. Okay, the next spot on the plot diagram is the climax. That is the turning point in the story where the main character comes face to face with the conflict and changes in some way. Okay, now it's really important that you don't think of the climax as the most exciting part, because a lot of times the climax is not the most exciting part of the story. It's really important that you see the climax as the turning point in the story. It's the part of the story where the main character comes face to face with that conflict that they're struggling with, and they experience some kind of change, like the Grinch experienced the change in his heart, and he no longer hated Christmas and was a bitter person. Now he was filled with love and excitement for Christmas. Okay, so that's a change. That's a change that he experienced. After the conflict, we have falling action, and that is where the loose ends of the plot are tied up and the conflict and climax are resolved. Now, a note on falling action. Some stories don't have falling action. Sometimes it goes right from the climax to the resolution. Okay, there's not a lot there. So falling action can be sort of optional as authors. Think about cliffhangers. Okay, when there's a cliffhanger, there's just no falling action and really no end of the story. It just sort of ends at the most exciting part. It just ends. It ends right there at the climax. So just keep that in mind, that sometimes the falling action is either really, really tiny or sometimes not there at all. But it is a part of the plot diagram, so we're going to talk about it. And we'll see some examples of stories that have falling action, and then we'll see examples of stories that don't have falling action. Finally, we have the resolution. That is where the story comes to a reasonable ending. Okay, reasonable ending. It doesn't have to be an ending that you like. It doesn't have to be all roses and sunshine. Okay, sometimes people die in the resolution, and that's not pleasant, but it is a reasonable ending. We can tell as readers that the story is over. Okay, and in the resolution, the lessons are learned either by the reader or by the characters in the story. And the theme is fully developed. Okay, the theme is revealed there in the resolution. So that's how the lessons are learned. Now, what I'd like you to do is watch this video. It's called Big Buck Bunny, and it has all the different parts of plot that we've talked about. Now, after you're done watching the video, I want you to try to place these elements on the plot diagram. Okay, so you can grab them right by the hand and just place them wherever. Okay, so, and then I want you to compare with your neighbor to see if you got the same things. Finally, I want you to take this poll and I want you to place yourself on the scale. Okay? Are you a 1? This isn't clicking for me and I need some help to figure out what I'm doing wrong. Are you a 2? It's getting easier, but I still need some practice to get it right. Are you a 3? I'm confident that I can do this correctly when asked. I can even do this with a text I've never read before. And 4 is, yes, I can do this and I'm ready for a challenge. Okay?